Well, you may not like it, Minister, but you can't deny
Maybe yes.
got style.
A satisfying Harry Potter film is a tall order by most standards. The four directors that have helmed the franchise have had the unenviable job of simultaneously adhering to conventions of blockbuster cinema, commanding an industry-sized production, and respecting the most important voice of all, that of J.K. Rowling's original books. So, while the Harry Potter films often seem to be a letdown on one count or another, it was refreshing and quite impressive to see that British television director David Yates had brought a new, more understated visual style to the fifth installment, The Order of the Phoenix. At first, I couldn't quite put my finger on what gave the film this quality. The film moved at a pretty brisk, economical pace, and yet it also seemed very obsessed with moments of stillness and silence, as if deliberately deferring entertainment. Upon rewatching the film, I noticed a preponderance of what I can only describe as straight-on shots, where characters are positioned looking straight forward at the camera, often against a flat background. The closest I came to finding a classification of this kind of shot was in a blog post by the film studies professor David Wardwell, who also had a lot of difficulty finding previous literature about this kind of shot and prefers to use the term planimetric to describe it. Straight-on shots are probably most widely popular in American independent films, Wes Anderson being one very big proponent of them, but they seem to be pretty rare in blockbusters. And once I started counting, I was surprised by just how many straight-on shots are in The Order of the Phoenix. These shots call attention to themselves as meticulously composed and strangely inert. Yates uses this feeling, for instance, in this shot, introducing the DA's first lesson to communicate the tentativeness of Hogwarts students learning on their own for the first time. This generic elevator setup channels Harry's anxiousness about being tried before the Wizengamot, and is also a great spectacle of wizarding bureaucracy. At times, these straight-on shots get a little hokey, as with this shot of the Inquisitorial Squad, trying to infiltrate the DA Scooby Gang style. But Yates' style is more often than not engaging and efficient, as with this shot, where the whole of the frame is filled with all the players of the scene, reflecting how Harry and his friends have literally been cornered in by Umbridge.
Have you brought the Veritaserum?
It's disconcerting to have characters directly facing forward, and Yates often denies us a reverse shot of what his characters are looking at. This is a choice that I found appropriate for a story that is so much about what is unseen or covered up or unresolved. In this shot, Hagrid and the trio are ostensibly looking at a storm that is brewing, but it's unclear as to whether it's an actual storm or a metaphorical storm that escalates into the mass breakout of Azkaban, which we immediately cut to next. Similarly, here it's unclear what Bellatrix is staring at. One kind of gets a sense of an on-stage performance where the fourth wall is unacknowledged. As artificial as these shots may seem, it seems even more odd when straight-on shots are used in shot-reverse shot sequences. We're usually more accustomed to seeing characters in what's known as a 3/4 view, where characters are shot at an angle, and sometimes over the shoulder of the other character. But instead, we see these characters looking directly at us, and never in the same frame with one another.
What are you doing?
Sometimes these setups feel bland and unexciting. A scene between Ron and Hermione only succeeds in illuminating just how boring wand fighting is. Other times the style is used more purposefully. In this scene, The composition gives us a sense of distance between the trio and Sirius when communicating through what amounts to the wizarding version of Skype. The straight-on shot reverse shot in this scene between Umbridge and the centaurs in wide shot speaks to the segregation between wizards and magical creatures.
You have no business here, centaur.
More centrally to the story, the straight-on shot reverse shot reflects Harry's predicament and mindset in the 5th installment. From the very beginning, Harry is framed alone in his own shots and literally in direct opposition to the other characters, much in the same way that the Wizarding World has slandered and isolated Harry in the story. At the same time, Harry's alienation is to an extent self-inflicted, as dramatized in this scene before the climactic battle. Here, Harry tries to leave his friends to fight alone, and the camera tracks with him as if Harry has deliberately forced himself into a separate shot. By the end of the film, however, a tracking shot of Harry eases into a straight-on shot of him walking together with his friends. Harry has willfully reframed himself with his friends. The Order of the Phoenix is all about looking. A surprising amount of plot points are communicated just through static shots of characters doing nothing but looking and following other characters' gazes. Looking is of utmost importance to the characters, especially in this scene when Umbridge finally breaks into the Room of Requirement. The incredibly flat, tableau-like shot of Umbridge and the Inquisitorial Squad quickly and wordlessly conveys the fact that Cho ratted out the DA. This tiny plot point is the payoff to another straight-on shot that occurred previously of Cho uneasily looking at the proclamation about students being questioned. Ironically, my favorite scene of the film is the most dialogue-filled scene, where Hermione organizes a meeting at the Hog's Head. The scene is like a battle against the speculating glares on Harry. The trajectory of the conversation exemplifies the two extremes of how people look at celebrities. At first, the group regards Harry as a fame-whoring delinquent.
Might as well clear out now. Come on, let's go. They're just here because they think I'm some sort of freak.
Wait, is it true you can produce a Patronus charm?
Then the consensus wildly swings to hagiography, regarding Harry as an all-powerful messiah.
You really did fight off you-know-who in the flesh.
Wait. Look.
Frustrated by the misconceptions about him,
Like
Harry finally breaks his silence.
You don't know what that's like.
Only when he shares the realities of his experience to the group does he finally begin to come to terms with himself.
You're right, Harry, we don't.
And realize what he has to offer
why we
in
need
helping
help.
his classmates.
Because if we're going to have any chance of beating...
The moment of honesty finally breaks the ice between the two
Voldemort.
parties. The music swells, and we cut to a shot where the trio are no longer separated from everyone else, but are being joined by them.
Keep practicing on your own.
Later in the film, the straight-on shot reverse shot between the trio and the rest of the DA is revisited. But this time there is a genuine rapport between the two parties. In the scene, we also see Harry and Jo subtly fawning over each other from across separate shots. But when Harry finally crosses the barrier, leaving his shot,
See you in the common room.
Ginny enters that shot and looks forward at Harry, who is now unattainable. The difficulty of making connections, romantic or otherwise, is a running theme in the movie. In this sequence of straight-on shots, we see, etched onto the faces of our three protagonists, disappointment, frustration, and anticlimax, feelings that are all very much tied to the overlong 5th book. I don't want to overstate David Yates' authorship of the straight-on shots in this film. Cinematographer Sławomir Idziak and editor Mark Day probably deserve equal credit. Also, the recently released Half-Blood Prince had a pretty different, if equally interesting, visual style. the Half-Blood Prince seems to have far fewer straight-on shots, which seems consistent with the more fun-filled story and the more confident Harry this time around. Still, a number of straight-on shots are used, and often for their deadpan comic quality, like in the awkwardness of this scene at the Quidditch tryouts. Equally hilarious is this straight-on shot, where we see Hermione's seething reaction to Harry winning the Felix Felicis. Again, Yates seems to love to watch people watching other people.
If not always in the way we expect.
Yates might not make all the right choices for the Harry Potter franchise, but he always seems to make pretty interesting ones.